Lost Season 3, the season where logic takes a vacation and you're trapped in a fever dream with a polar bear cage, a spinal surgeon, and a Stephen King paperback. Forget your expectations. This is where the show ditches the map and hands you a compass that only points to what the hell. Let's get right to it. The infamous polar bear cage. This isn't your mum's book club, unless your mum's idea of fun is sipping warm Chardonnay while contemplating the void and being held hostage by people who look like they just got kicked out of a PTA bake sale. Welcome to 50 Shades of Stockholm Syndrome. This book club, it's in a literal cage on a tropical island, and the only member is Jack Shepherd, who'd rather perform spinal surgery on himself with a rusty spoon. Imagine Survivor meets Saw, but with more sand and even less dignity. His captor, Juliet, is there to force him into a Stephen King book report because psychological torture now comes with homework. Next up, waterboarding with a copy of Carrie. The blood is corn syrup, and the trauma is gluten-free. Why? That's the million-dollar question. The answer? Probably the writers lost a bet with a raccoon. Or maybe the raccoon is the showrunner. Suddenly, everything makes sense. Season 3 of Lost didn't start. It tripped, face-planted into a pile of surreal nonsense, and then asked if anyone had seen its dignity. The polar bear's using it as a chew toy. No explosions, no epic speeches, just forced literary analysis and a whole lot of what the actual hell am I watching? It's like your English teacher hijacked HBO for a day and forgot the syllabus. The showrunners basically screamed, "Abandon all hope, ye who binge here." The rules are made up, the points don't matter, and the polar bear is in a union. Drew Carey, eat your heart out. The first 6 episodes, a masterclass in trolling your audience so hard they start questioning their own existence. Existential Dread, now streaming in HD, sponsored by Zoloft and Regret. They aired as a block, a sampler platter of confusion. Then the show vanished for months, leaving viewers to marinate in regret and half-eaten Doritos. The real mystery, where did my self-respect go? Our heroes? Split up and tormented in what looks like a summer camp, run by philosophy majors who failed out of college and now major in gaslighting. Welcome to Camp Existential Crisis. Kate and Sawyer, breaking rocks in the sun like they wandered into a Great Depression cosplay nobody asked for. Next up, the Dust Bowl TikTok challenge. Less high-concept mystery, more Survivor Stockholm Syndrome edition. Next week, who can ugly cry the longest in a cage? Spoiler, it's the audience. The big question isn't how do we escape, it's will Sawyer ever get a fish biscuit? Spoiler, he does, and it's as satisfying as a wet sock. Gordon Ramsay would call the health inspector, this slow, trollish pacing. It's a gamble so wild even Vegas wouldn't take the odds. The house always wins, but here the house is a sentient island with abandonment issues. After 2 seasons of running from monsters and opening hatches, the audience is told to sit down, shut up, and enjoy the existential crisis. Please clap, or blink twice if you need help. We're supposed to ponder the meaning of life, the universe, and why this book club exists. There is no answer, only more questions. It's like a philosophy class taught by a magic 8-ball with commitment issues. It's like if your favourite band followed up a rock anthem with a 10-minute lute solo about tax law, then set the lute on fire for the insurance money. Now that's what I call Volume 3, IRS Edition. Unsurprisingly, a lot of people noped out. Some are still wandering the jungle looking for a plot. If found, please return to ABC. Reward, 1 fish biscuit. People wanted action, mystery and smoke monsters, not a TED talk on the ethics of kidnapping and breakfast food. Today's topic, is your captor gluten-free? Instead, we got psychological torture and a slow burn mystery about why the others shop at Target and dress like they're in a cult-themed Gap ad. Now 30% off all existential dread. But buried in all this madness were the seeds of the show's real philosophy. Or maybe it was just crabgrass. Who can say? Gardening tips with J.J. Abrams, water with tears of confusion. The island isn't just a place. It's a psychological escape room with no exit, no clues, and the Wi-Fi password is good luck. It's case-sensitive and changes every episode. The others, not just villains, they're regular people with weird hobbies, questionable fashion and breakfast routines that would make a cult leader blush. Welcome to the 7 a.m. Kidnapping Club, bagels optional. Pancakes, marital drama and the occasional kidnapping, just like your family but with more jungle and fewer restraining orders. Pass the syrup and the chloroform. Except their arguments involve time-travelling donkey wheels because at this point, why not throw in a sentient toaster? Next week, the blender unionizes. This blend of the painfully ordinary and the completely bonkers. That's Lost's secret sauce, and Season 3 is where they dump the whole bottle on your head, then set the kitchen on fire. Chef's kiss, arsonist's delight. It's confusing, it's maddening, and it's exactly what they wanted. Welcome to the polar bear cage, folks. Abandon hope, bring snacks, and maybe a magic 8-ball. You'll need all 3. Before we delve deeper into the narrative labyrinth let us take a brief but necessary detour into the peculiar world of the human mind. Consider, if you will, the humble pigeon. In the 1940s, the behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner conducted a rather famous experiment. He placed hungry pigeons in a box and arranged for food to be dispensed at random intervals, completely unrelated to the pigeons' actions. The birds, however, being pattern-seeking creatures, began to associate the arrival of food with whatever they happened to be doing at the time. One would turn anti-clockwise, another would thrust its head into a corner. They developed elaborate personal rituals, convinced that their specific dance was causing the food to appear. They had become superstitious. This phenomenon, known as operant conditioning, is not limited to our feathered friends. Humans are masters of finding patterns where none exist. We see faces in clouds, hear messages in records played backwards, and most pertinently, we construct elaborate theories to explain the inexplicable. When presented with a series of random or chaotic events, our brains instinctively strive to connect the dots, to forge a narrative that makes sense of the noise. We are, at our core, storytellers. We cannot help but impose order on chaos, even when the chaos is entirely the point. This is the very engine that powered the early internet forums dedicated to dissecting every frame of. The writers of understood this fundamental human trait better than anyone. They weren't just telling a story. They were conducting a grand televised Skinner box experiment on a global scale. They would drop in seemingly random elements, a polar bear, a set of numbers, a four-toed statue, and then sit back and watch us, the pigeons, perform our intellectual dances. We would spin theories, connect disparate clues, and build vast, intricate castles of logic upon the flimsiest of foundations. Was the island purgatory? Was it an alien experiment? Was it all a dream in the mind of a golden retriever? No theory was too outlandish, no connection too tenuous, and the showrunners, those mischievous psychologists, actively encouraged it. They would drop tantalizing hints in interviews, create cryptic websites, and embed clues in the most obscure corners of the screen. They were feeding our addiction, rewarding our ritualistic behavior with just enough narrative pellets to keep us pecking at the screen. They knew that the mystery itself was more compelling than any possible solution. The joy for many was not in finding the answer, but in the collaborative, creative, and often completely bonkers process of the search. The show was a mirror, reflecting our own desperate need for meaning in a world that often provides none. This brings us neatly to a rather wonderful psychological quirk known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. In essence, it is a cognitive bias whereby people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. Put more simply, it's the phenomenon of being too incompetent to recognize your own incompetence. The chap at the pub who, after 3 pints, is convinced he could manage the England football team better than the professionals. The amateur chef who believes they're burnt to a crisp shepherd's pie is a culinary masterpiece. It is the mountain of blissful ignorance upon which confidence is often built. And, I would argue, it was the defining psychological state of the average viewer in 2007. We all thought we had it figured out. Armed with a dial-up connection and a head full of half-remembered plot points, we would march onto internet message boards with the unshakable confidence of a Nobel laureate. We were experts. We had connected the numbers to the Valenzetti equation. We knew the true identity of Jacob, and we were absolutely certain that the island was a metaphor for post-9/11 American paranoia. We had constructed such elaborate, internally consistent theories that we couldn't possibly be wrong. The evidence was all there, provided you squinted a bit and ignored all the bits that didn't fit. We were standing proudly atop Mount Stupid, waving a flag of our own brilliant deductions. The beauty of, and Season 3 in particular, was how it systematically dismantled this confidence. Just when you thought you had a handle on the others, the show would introduce Ben Linus, a man whose motivations were as clear as mud, or reveal that their entire community was a facade. Just when you had a working theory about the island's properties, it would throw in a time-travelling consciousness, or a man who couldn't die. With each new revelation, the showrunners gave our carefully constructed theories a little shove, sending them tumbling down into the valley of despair depicted on the Dunning-Kruger chart. We were forced to confront the sheer scale of our own ignorance. This process was, for many, deeply uncomfortable. It's one thing to be wrong, it's another to have your perceived expertise so thoroughly and publicly debunked week after week. This, I suspect, is where the backlash against the show began to fester. It wasn't just that the story was confusing, it was that the story was making us stupid. And nobody likes to feel stupid. The show was no longer a puzzle to be solved, but a lesson in intellectual humility. It was a weekly reminder that no matter how clever we thought we were, the people in the writer's room were always one step ahead, gleefully pulling the rug out from under our feet. No discussion of the bewildering journey that was Season 3 would be complete without mentioning the cautionary tale of Nikki and Paolo. Oh, Nikki and Paolo. For those fortunate enough to have wiped them from their memory, allow me to re-traumatize you. Midway through the season, the show suddenly introduced 2 new castaways who, we were assured, had been there all along. They were a glamorous, bickering couple, a sort of low-rent Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, who had somehow remained completely off-screen for 2.5 seasons. Their sudden appearance was met with a collective resounding hoo from the global audience. The writer's intention, one assumes, was to expand the world of the show, to remind us that there were other survivors with their own stories. The execution, however, was a spectacular misfire. Nikki and Paolo were grating, their storyline involving stolen diamonds was tedious, and their presence felt utterly shoehorned into the established dynamics of the group. They were the televisual equivalent of a new step-parent trying too hard to be your friend. The audience rejected them with a ferocity usually reserved for political scandals or changes to the recipe of a beloved chocolate bar. The backlash was immediate, vocal, and almost universal. And so, in a move of breathtaking meta-commentary, the writers did something extraordinary. They listened. The episode Exposé was crafted as a direct response to the fan hatred. It was an entire hour dedicated to filling in Nikki and Paolo's backstory, culminating in one of the most darkly hilarious and horrifying deaths in television history. Paralyzed by the venom of a Medusa spider, a creature whose existence is just another of the island's many absurdities, the couple are mistaken for dead by their fellow survivors and unceremoniously buried alive. The final shot is of grains of sand falling on Nikki's wide-open, paralyzed eye. It was brutal, it was funny, and it was a direct message to the audience. You wanted them gone? Here you go. Happy now? This episode stands as a unique monument in television history. It's a moment where the creators broke the fourth wall, not with a wink, but with a shovel. They acknowledged their misstep and corrected it in the most savage way imaginable, turning a creative failure into a piece of pitch-black art. It was a warning to the fans about the dangers of getting what you wish for, and perhaps a warning to themselves about the perils of straying too far from what made the show work. Nikki and Paolo may have been terrible characters, but their demise was a sublime piece of television, a grim, self-aware joke that perfectly encapsulated the show's strange, often adversarial relationship with its own audience. At the heart of the Others community, and indeed at the heart of Season 3's mystery, was the enigmatic figure of Benjamin Linus. When we first met him, he was posing as Henry Gale, a hapless balloonist who had crashed on the island. He was meek, pathetic, and utterly convincing. The slow reveal of his true identity as the leader of the Others was one of the show's most masterful strokes. Played with mesmerizing, bug-eyed intensity by Michael Emerson, Ben was unlike any television villain we had seen before. He wasn't a cackling megalomaniac or a muscle-bound thug. He was a quiet, manipulative bureaucrat of chaos. Ben's power lay not in physical strength, but in his profound understanding of human psychology. He was a master of emotional leverage. He knew exactly which buttons to press, which insecurities to exploit, which loyalties to twist. He could turn a person's love for their child, their guilt over a past mistake, or their simple desire for answers into a weapon against them. His conversations with Locke, in particular, were a symphony of psychological manipulation, a chess match where Ben always seemed to be playing a different, more complex game. He claimed to speak for a higher power, an omniscient figure named Jacob, but we were never quite sure if Jacob was real or just another tool in Ben's arsenal of control. This ambiguity was the source of his terror and his fascination. Was Ben a true believer or a consummate con artist? Did he genuinely have a connection to the island's mystical properties, or was he just the ultimate Wizard of Oz, a small man pulling levers behind a curtain of mystique and fear? The show dangled both possibilities in front of us, refusing to commit. Kind of like how we dangle the subscribe button in front of you, refusing to commit to a high sub count. But hey, no pressure. One moment he would perform a seemingly impossible feat, summoning the smoke monster or predicting the future. The next, he would be exposed as a liar, his grand plans crumbling into pathetic failure. He was simultaneously all-powerful and utterly powerless. This duality made him the perfect antagonist for a show that was, at its core, about faith versus reason. Ben was the embodiment of that conflict. He demanded faith from his followers and from our heroes, while simultaneously using cold, hard reason and psychological trickery to achieve his ends. He was a walking paradox, a man who could order an entire community to be gassed to death and then weep over the memory of his childhood pet rabbit. In creating Ben Linus, the writers gave the show's abstract philosophical debates a human face, a creepy, compelling, and utterly untrustworthy human face. John Locke, the tragic hero of the island, once spoke of a magic box. He described a scenario where you put a question into a box and whatever you needed appears. The island, he believed, was this magic box. It had given him the use of his legs, a sense of purpose, a destiny. This concept of the magic box is a wonderful metaphor for the show's own narrative strategy. For a long time, Lost operated as a magic box for its writers. Whenever they needed a new mystery, a convenient plot device, or a shocking twist, the island would provide. Need to stop a character from leaving? The island develops mysterious magnetic properties. Need a new antagonist? The island summons a French science team from 16 years in the past. This magic box approach is exhilarating, but it comes with a significant risk. In the world of storytelling, this is what one might call writing narrative checks. A writer can introduce any number of mysteries and promise that they will all be paid off later. The polar bear? There's a reason. The numbers, they mean something. The whispers in the jungle, all will be explained. For a time, the audience is happy to extend this line of credit. We trust that the checks will eventually be cashed, that the promises will be kept. The thrill of the mystery is enough to sustain us. Season 3 was the point at which the bills started to come due. The number of outstanding narrative checks was becoming alarmingly high. We had accrued mysteries involving the Dharma Initiative, the others, the hostiles, the sickness, the statue, Jacob, and the fundamental properties of the island itself. The magic box was overflowing with IOUs. The audience, once patient, began to grow restless. The suspicion began to creep in that perhaps the writers didn't have a plan after all. Perhaps they were just making it up as they went along, throwing random elements into the box and hoping for the best. This is the fundamental tension of a high-concept mystery show. The writers must maintain the illusion that they are meticulous architects with a grand blueprint, while simultaneously retaining the flexibility to be creative gardeners, allowing the story to grow in unexpected directions. In Season 3, the balance began to tip. The architecture started to look a little shaky, and the garden was becoming overgrown with narrative weeds. The magic box was still producing wonders, but we were beginning to worry that it might be empty inside. The show was writing checks that some feared its story could never hope to cash. Among the many strange events of Season 3, the arrival of Naomi Dorrit stands out. She didn't wash ashore or emerge from a mysterious hatch. No, she fell out of the sky. Desmond, gifted with flashes of the future, has a vision of Charlie Pace dying. In his frantic attempts to prevent this, he and Charlie, along with Hurley and Jin, stumble upon a crashing helicopter. Inside, they find Naomi, a sharp, resourceful woman with a satellite phone and a story that doesn't quite add up. Her appearance was a jolt of electricity to the system, a sudden, tangible link to the outside world that the castaways had been seeking for so long. Naomi represented a new kind of hope, but also a new kind of mystery. She claimed to have been sent by Penelope Widmore, Desmond's long-lost love, to find him. This was the story our heroes and we, the audience, desperately wanted to believe. It was a clean, romantic and satisfying explanation, a rescue mission. Finally, away off this godforsaken rock, the satellite phone she carried became the ultimate symbol of this hope, a direct line to salvation. The latter half of the season became a frantic race to make contact with her supposed rescuers. However, this is lost, and nothing is ever that simple. Cracks began to appear in Naomi's story. Ben, the master manipulator, insisted that she was not who she said she was, that her arrival was the beginning of a far more dangerous chapter for everyone on the island. The castaways were split. Should they trust the word of a proven liar like Ben, or the promise of a mysterious stranger who literally fell from the sky? It was a classic lost dilemma, forcing the characters to choose between a comforting lie and a terrifying truth. A choice made all the more difficult because they couldn't be sure which was which. The conflict over Naomi and her satellite phone ultimately led to the season's tragic climax. In order to disable a jamming device that was blocking the phone's signal, Charlie Pace had to make the ultimate sacrifice. He drowned in the Looking Glass underwater station, but not before scrawling a final desperate warning on his hand, not Penny's boat. In that one heartbreaking moment, the hope that Naomi represented was shattered. The rescuers were not rescuers. The way off the island was not a path to safety, but a doorway to an even greater danger. The magic box had opened and a Trojan horse had emerged. And then came the twist. For 3 seasons, Lost had relied on a signature narrative device, the flashback. Each episode would interweave the present-day island drama with scenes from a character's past, slowly revealing who they were before the crash. It was a clever, effective structure that gave the show its depth and emotional resonance. We'd grown accustomed to it. It was the rhythm of the show. And then, in the final moments of the Season 3 finale, Through the Looking Glass, the showrunners ripped up their own rulebook in the most audacious way imaginable. Throughout the episode, we had been following what we assumed were flashbacks of Jack. We saw him at his lowest point, bearded, addicted to painkillers, and profoundly miserable. He seemed to be on the verge of suicide, standing on a bridge, ready to jump. It was a grim but familiar look into the tortured past of Dr. Shepard. We watched these scenes, sympathizing with his pre-island despair, assuming this was the man who would eventually find redemption and purpose after the crash. We were so confident in the established pattern, so locked into the show's formula, that we never questioned it. The final scene takes place at an airfield. Jack has arranged to meet someone. A car pulls up and out steps Kate. The conversation is strained, awkward. They talk about how they haven't seen each other in some time. And then Jack delivers the line that changed everything. He talks about his father. He talks about flying. And then he looks at her with a desperate, broken plea. "We have to go back," he cries. And in that instant, the entire episode, the entire season, the entire series reconfigured itself in our minds. These weren't flashbacks, they were flash-forwards. They had made it off the island, and it was a catastrophe. This was more than just a clever gimmick. It was a seismic shift in the very DNA of the show. For 3 years, the central goal had been simple: get off the island. Rescue was the holy grail. But with 5 simple words, the show posed a terrifying new question. What if rescue isn't the happy ending? What if the island, for all its horrors and mysteries, was actually better than the world they left behind? It was a stunning, game-changing moment that re-energized the series and silenced the critics who claimed the writers were just making it up. This was a move of supreme confidence, a narrative check that was cashed in the most spectacular fashion, promising a future for the show that was suddenly more mysterious and compelling than its past. So, what are we to make of Lost's 3rd season? It was, by any measure, a bewildering, frustrating and often brilliant piece of television. It was the season that tested the patience of its audience to breaking point, that gave us the abomination of Nikki and Paolo, and that forced us to sit through 6 episodes of people breaking rocks. It was the season where the Dunning-Kruger effect ran rampant through the fan community, as we all climbed our little mountains of stupid, convinced we had the answers, only to be sent tumbling down by the next inexplicable plot twist. It was, in many ways, a glorious mess. Yet it was also the season where the show found its philosophical heart. It gave us the magnificent, manipulative Benjamin Linus, a villain for the ages. It explored the complex psychology of faith, control, and the human need for meaning with a depth rarely seen on network television. It dared to be slow, to be confusing, to be actively antagonistic towards its audience's desire for easy answers. It took the established formula of the flashback and in its final moments turned it completely on its head, breathing new life into the entire enterprise and setting the stage for the even more bizarre narrative acrobatics to come. Season 3 was the show's difficult adolescent phase. It was awkward, it was moody, it was prone to baffling decisions, but it was also where it truly began to figure out what it wanted to be. It shed the skin of a simple survival story and revealed itself as something far stranger and more ambitious. A sprawling, multi-layered epic about science, faith, destiny, and the messy, contradictory nature of the human heart. It was a grand Skinner-box experiment that held a mirror up to our own cognitive biases, our own desire to find patterns in the chaos. It made us all into superstitious pigeons, pecking away at our keyboards in search of a narrative pellet. In the end, Lost Season 3 was not the beginning of the end, as many frustrated viewers claimed at the time. It was the end of the beginning. It closed the chapter on the simple question of how will they get off the island, and opened a new, far more profound book, one whose central question became, why do they have to go back? It was a season that confused, infuriated, and ultimately rewarded those who stuck with it. It proved that sometimes the most compelling stories aren't the ones that give us all the answers, but the ones that leave us with better, more interesting questions. And a healthy dose of spider-induced paralysis, of course.